I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more, and then it's a night.
Y'all tuning in. My Dixon year caller. You want to say what? Call her.
Okay.
Call her. Oh, the hell with it. This is a little something new from the underground.
I don't know exactly the years for this, so you'll have to go back. But I'll say some things that we'll remember whatever year it was. But
That's right.
so
Dedicated to the east and
I think that
south side. That's right.
I can't remember where I was in the process of maybe I had done Give Me the Night, or maybe I was making Give Me the Night. No, I was making Give Me the Night. Give Me the Night was 2000. So my whole life, a friend of mine who was very close to, who at the time was my best friend, more so a teacher of the streets. And he's actually also the person that kind of encouraged me into going into rap. I wasn't a freestyler. So I was writing rhymes and recording them with a friend of mine and another friend of mine who was a DJ. So I couldn't at the time remember freestyles. I've had multiple concussions when I was a kid from sports and falling down and things and so I don't have a memory to where I can pull up individual lines and things like that. Now it's crazy because I wrote my rhymes in my head, but there were so many I couldn't pull out individual lines like that. I used to hyperventilate if I was like battling people, so it wasn't my thing. I like to write and go into the studio and record because that's kind of how I got introduced into rap, was actually laying down some stuff on a 4-track or whatever. We'll get into that. But the year is the year that so let's fast forward. One of my friends that I grew up with, who's very close to me at that time and like pretty much through a lot of my high school and years later, he actually is on my first album, the cover, and he was basically super influential. He was super influential about me pursuing rap, because I never would have thought that. But in high school, he was like, man, just pursue it. And later on, and so much so that, I started to go to recording school in the mid 90s, early 90s, 94. So let's fast forward. Okay. All right. So whatever year this is, Cash Money Records and Rough Riders are on tour. Now, the gentleman that I was mentioning earlier, his first or second cousin that I've known ever since we were since I met him, so which would be like 1988. And then a little bit later on, I knew that he had a cousin who rapped in New Orleans. And now this was a gentleman that was hipping me to DJ Jubilee cassette tapes that he was bringing back from New Orleans. So I got hip to a lot of music, that way that wasn't really popular in the United States. So I knew there was this whole different kind of music down in New Orleans. My mom's family is all from Arkansas, deep South Arkansas. So, I dug it. I thought it was cool. I didn't take it super serious or anything. So, fast forward to whenever the Hot Boys, whenever those guys started making albums, I knew because Doogie was my friend's second cousin, perhaps, and Doogie is BG. So I started knowing about these guys very early on in their careers. But let's fast forward to the tour that the Rough Riders and the Hot Boys are on. That's why we're here. So, the day that the tour was supposed to come into Seattle, it was going to be, or it was at Key Arena in Seattle where the Sonics played. And we were supposed to meet up with the Hot Boys like at noon or 1. They were supposed to come in. So the idea was that we were going to meet up with them, and through all of the years and interaction and this and that, even with the gentleman who was his family member, we'd never worked on music together before. So this was going to be a big deal because we were going to finally do some music together, like maybe have an hour or 2 hours to like perhaps like work on some music. Now, like when I say that my boy was Doogie's cousin, he was his real cousin. So like he had access, you know, he was basically in, you know what I mean? And he wanted for nothing from them. So it wasn't even that kind of thing. He was just happy to be around family in New Orleans, which at the time, I think there were a lot of families from New Orleans that had spread out to Seattle, Washington, or that area. So it was real common. What's crazy is that same family chain also includes Ice Cube and Flavor Flav. So those are a whole nother part of this story. But from now, we'll just keep it on. Not even Doogie. This story is about DMX. So, we were supposed to meet up with those, with the Hot Boys, like right around, like I said, noon or 1. It kept getting later and later and later. And we were at the hotel, which we were going to just hop in the bus and then perhaps go to like my studio at the time or wherever, you know, like wherever. Like we had multiple places we could go and record. But they ended up procrastinating, like not procrastinating, but showing up late. Like it got to be, you know, like 8 o'clock or something, that it was like almost time for the show. So at that point we knew obviously we're not making any tracks with the Hot Boys. But prior to this show, Rough Riders and the Hot Boys had I think a fight, and I want to say it was in Ohio, but it may not have been in Ohio, somewhere around there. And at that point, instead of being like one big family and tour, wherever they showed up at this point, and whoever was more popular would open, and I'm sorry, whoever was more popular would close the show, and the other crew would open. So they weren't on speaking terms by any means, and so it was time to get to the show. And at this point, Cash Money, none of the gentlemen, no buses had showed up. So we go over to Key Arena, and we got passes that'll, get to anything you want. So we going through the back, we going through the side, and the way they have it is that Cash Money is going to close the show because they were more popular in Seattle at that time. So that means that the Rough Riders would open. So as we get in, Cash Money still hasn't showed up, and the show's about to start. So they push us into, so it would be me and my boy and his brother. And we, the Cash Money story is a whole other thing. But at this point, they push us in, and not into front row, but between front row and the stage. So like if you paid front row seats, we're in front of you and we have no position we need to be in. We just stand or whatever. But it was a live ass, obviously it was an amazing place to watch. The first group was the Locks. So the Locks perform and they get off stage, and then my boy's brother, who was just a savage by every means at that time, he goes over and he starts hollering at the Locks. Of course, I had the weed that we were selling, but that's a different story. So we're at this point watching the Rough Riders perform. Let's rewind. So my boy calls me up, and he's like, yeah, it's time to go. So at this time, we're going to the show, and I don't have like an outfit. So I have a jacket that I purchased on the way at I want to say Wilson's, and it was super fresh. It was white and suede. And granted, the fashion in Seattle was like millions of years behind Detroit. It was just a fresh ass three-quarter white suede the Wilson, the one that was like, 275, you know what I mean? And that was definitely a baller's jacket back in the Northwest at the time because we didn't have Pelly Pel. So I am at the show and I am in this fresh ass white suede 3/4 jacket. And we're in the front row and we're like watching the show. And at that point, I'm going to be honest, man, that was like just it was just the right shit I needed to watch these guys perform. The locks were just incredible. I think Eve. So then it comes time for X. So when we come back, I will let you know what happens. Hey, this is Oyster Pep. Stick around to hear the rest of the story. This is Oyster Pep. Stick around for the rest of the story. Okay, so we're watching the show. Like I think I probably was I had the show like on where I was like recording or calling people and letting them hear it. You know what I mean? And so behind DMX, there's this huge X that they would light on fire. So at this tour, it would be very common for X to just make the whole place dark, pray, do prayers. But when it came time for Slippin', that's when everything just got very spiritual. So X is doing Slippin'. Probably after that, he's reading, Psalms. But this huge X behind him is set on fire. And it's just burning. It's burning. And X is just killing the crowd. I mean, you wouldn't even know this is the opening act, man. And honestly, at that time, Slippin' was a more important song of my life than The Locks, which is crazy. But that was just peak DMX. And I wouldn't have even told you that, like, DMX was my favorite rapper or anything at the time because I liked stuff a little different. But I mean, he had cuts. The summer where he had the one song, and then the song. I mean, that was just fucking mind blowing. That was a great album. So anyway, X is performing. Everybody's just like, in tears. You know what I mean? Calling their girl, calling whatever, like letting them hear it. And then X starts going into like a psalm, and that was the end of the show. And I think, that was the end of the Rough Riders set. So X gets off. DMX gets off the stage. The big X they had gets put out, and we immediately get rushed. Into the area where the buses are coming in because it's time for Cash Money. And they had a strict policy where those crew would never really see each other because of the fight, I want to say in Ohio or somewhere, Indiana or somewhere like that. So we immediately from that little like purgatory spot from the stage to the front row, we get pushed out into the area that's about to be where the Supersonics, where the visiting team goes in. And that's where Cash Money was going to go. So in other words, Rough Riders had the home locker room, and Cash Money had the visitors. So that's a whole nother story. But meanwhile, while we're waiting for Doogie to come in, this is right after they had filmed the Hot Boys video, the video where the cars are all skidding, and Doogie gets out. Me and my boy are hollering at Doogie. we're talking to Doogie. They had that first round of Cash Money chains. We're like trying them on, and as it happens, because Doogie was apolitical, I mean, he wasn't caught up in any of that shit. He was on probation, I think, at the time. So like, he wasn't a threat. He didn't care. So as we're sitting there and Doogie's just talking, we're talking. My boy's just talking to Doogie. DMX slides past me to go out. So DMX, with his back layered in soot from this huge X that was on fire because he was in front of it. So like his whole back was ash. So like